All right, I think I'm live. So see if your thingy shows up.
Not yet. Oh, there you go.
Did it pop up?
Watch live.
So turn your volume down. Live.
You're on a delay. We have to remember that
Okay.
so that we're giving time for people to respond.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll do an introduction and a how to use this thing.
So comments. I see comments there. So I'm going
You
to.
comment and see if it pops up. Oh, hey Lisa.
Hey, yay! It works. There we go.
Okay. So in a second, just in a few seconds, when we get to 6 o'clock,
Mm-hmm.
I will talk to
Yeah,
everybody
we'll
about
get
the delay.
started here in just a minute. I wanted to go make sure we got on. So anybody who's jumping on, hang tight. Feel free to say hey. Tell us where you're from.
The other thing is, anyone who's on
This
right
is
this
Renee.
hey, anybody who's on right this second, if you start posting questions, I'm gonna moderate for Bob so that I will be able to get to them. You're on a slight delay, so it doesn't matter if we go on to another topic, still interrupt, and I'll make sure that it gets handled in
Oh,
more said.
there we go. Now I can see myself.
Mm. Oh my gosh, all these food on the floor.
Oh, and I see lots of people jumping on. That's awesome. Can you see as people jump on?
Not really.
So sorry if I sound a little baffled here. This is my first time doing this on Facebook this
I
particular
do
way.
see it. Good job, people.
All right. See, I don't see it. No fair.
Maybe you could scroll up. Scroll up and you'll see it.
Hmm?
Oh, you don't. Why
Mm-mm.
not?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna handle it for you.
All right. Hmm. I'm not sure why I don't see it.
Hi, everybody.
We've got all kinds of
Wow,
folks
you
showing.
guys are really showing up.
All right.
So we got 6 minutes to go. I'm gonna keep repeating something. So if you guys have had to hear it over and over, I'm sorry. But we are going, you guys are on a slight delay, which is fine, but I want to encourage you. I'm going to moderate for Bob. I want to encourage you, even if we've gone on to another subject, to continue to post your questions.
Yeah, definitely.
And I will interrupt Bob and we'll go back and forth and we'll make sure that as much as we can accommodate, we will. The other thing is, for anybody who went ahead and emailed in questions, we have them all written down and ready to speak to you about them. So we'll also bring up those subject lines. So I am watching everything go by and I'm going to keep writing it down on a notebook pad and making sure that we get to it if we can. And if we run out of time, that's okay. We plan on doing this again. We feel like it's a real community outreach and that it's something that is a plus in our world for sure, because I know our students really like to have time just asking questions with us.
And I did post a link to the next event that we're doing. I believe it's January 8th. So promise, I'm sure I've already got a couple of questions here that are just wonderful. We're definitely going to start with those right on time. But like Renee said, do keep posting them because I'm going to do my very best to try to give you some meat as we go through all of this. And I'm sure half of my questions will create new questions.
And Lisa, thank you so much for that shout out. Definitely. And we'll do our best to work through that. She did an M&F, a WMNF shout out for us.
Oh,
So thank you. I
thank you.
appreciate that.
I'm sorry I missed that.
A person had asked about IBS specific herbs and
Oh,
health.
that's great.
So I'm gonna list that as one of the
I need to
things.
get back on M&F one of these days soon. I haven't been on in a while. Babble on incoherently. That's always
Thank you.
fun when we get to go on M&F, although I don't think the guests are in studio anymore, and that's half the fun.
Yeah, it's nice to be there for sure. Hey, Tyson.
Hey.
Nice to see you. I hope everybody's staying warm. Brian, awesome.
I was going to say, where's everybody coming from? I know we had a
All over. So we have South Florida here with Christina. I
awesome.
had a UK that I just saw go
Oh,
by.
that's amazing. What time is it in the UK?
Le-
I can't keep track of all that stuff.
Lisa's around Destin for Thomas. Lots of South St. Pete and those people. Patricia is from the UK.
Awesome. Mm.
Nice to hear from you and see you. Keep warm. I'm sure it's awful over there. Not awful, but the weather, lovely, but the weather for sure coming from Florida. And so there you go. Good. Thank you, Brian, for checking in with that. Awesome. Okay, so as we go forward, North Carolina, Kristen. Oh, I haven't seen you in so long. Nice to see
Hey.
you. Michigan too. Oh, good Lord, you people. Put sweaters on. I went to the beach today. Sorry for saying that, Georgia. Oh, Melbourne. That's where I was born. Chrissy, I was born in Melbourne. In the UK too, 11 p.m. Thank you for staying up.
Oh, man, I
Yeah.
appreciate you.
Okay, so we are 2 minutes out. So I'm going to say one more time that please, anything that Bob says that needs to be clarified, we are on a delay for everybody so that it doesn't matter if we have switched subjects. I'm going to watch the feed, and if you put it in the feed, I will write it down and I will stop Bob and we will try to get an answer for it whenever there's an opportunity. So feel like you can continue to say anything that you need to say, and I'm going to watch it for him that everybody gets heard as much as we can. And if it doesn't, we'll use it on the next event. I'll make sure that it gets addressed on the next event, or you can fire off in the comments afterwards and we'll see if we can get answers to some people.
Awesome. Looks like we got a nice crowd on here. Holy crap. And I'm going to hold my battlement until we get like right at 6 o'clock here so that I don't repeat the gibberish that I do in the front. And then we're going to dive into these questions. I'm super excited about it. Renee made
Hey,
sure I got
Liz.
which Liz? Oh,
Liz
our Liz.
Kiefer.
Yay.
Liz Kiefer, thank you so much for your beautiful Christmas.
Oh, and I heard our spot's going to run on this week.
Lauren, hey. What is that?
The Channel 13 here.
Nice. Why don't you say that?
I'm not sure of the date yet, but the rumor has it that maybe Thursday or Friday that we've got a little 5 minute spot that Channel 13 did for us that we taped about the school last week or
They're
something like
now talking to each other, and I love when that happens.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. It's about 6:01. If you don't know, I'm Bob Linde, and this is Renee Prince. And we are here. We're herbalists, herb teachers. I'm an acupuncturist. We're registered herbalists with the American Herbalist Guild. But it's funny. I saw somebody doing this in the acupuncture realm, and they were doing it specifically for acupuncture students or practitioners that were overseas that had very different training than we get here in the US. And I was like, wow, we need this for herbalists. We need this for people who are wondering how to find a practitioner, what they should do, how they can take care of self-care. And so what I found was the folks who were doing it in the acupuncture realm, they were acupuncturists and they weren't talking about herbs and they didn't know Western herbs or Western ideas. And I'm kind of a unique little booger that I kind of walk between Western herbal energetics, Chinese herbal energetics, acupuncture, of course, and I throw in a little functional medicine just for flavor. And so I really wanted to take an opportunity at a time when we're no longer traveling around. We're not, all of our conferences have gotten canceled, and our opportunity to reach out to a larger audience has been greatly reduced. And I wanted to see if this model worked as a way to really bring us together and start to bring into the new year our loss of our ability to communicate in person and take a little time and share some ideas and my thoughts and do my best to raise the bar for herbalists and acupuncturists in every tradition. Um,
I do have something to say about that a little bit. Real quick for the last time.
I
I
like we
am,
start.
yeah, I'm moderating, so please continue to ask. Like Patricia, I just got your eye question. Anything specific, throw it up there for sure, and I'm going to do my best to walk through. But one of the things I wanted to say is I had allotted this to some of our new students who are moving through one of the
Yeah.
courses and into advanced, and we just found it to be such a help just to literally troubleshoot
Hmm.
what was going on or give our clinical experience. And a lot of times we say in our experience, because regardless of what the books have said, if we've done it 100 times and seen this certain thing work out, it is something that we feel like needs to be passed forward, or it's a new thing that we discovered. So feel free to ask. Plus, we're going to try to continue this on. I think it's a huge asset for the
Right.
clinical realm all the way to the normal layman just trying to have some more holistic health ideas.
Yeah, and like there's no dumb questions or anything here, and I expect everybody from the hobbyist to somebody who's dealing with their own health issues to experienced practitioners, and for me, this is kind of a new platform, and although I will be as specific as I can, some of the questions are very in depth, and so it is important to recognize that I'm not your herbalist, but I will do my best to give you some guidance and suggestions to get you going in the right direction. Because every person is unique, and whether we're using energetic system or whether we're using a more Western medical approach to things, the uniqueness of how a particular disease manifests in an individual really dictates which herb over another that we might be choosing. So I think that's super important to recognize. And I will say also, Renee and I like to talk. So one of the things, if you don't know, you can find, search Tradition School of Herbal Studies. That is our program. We have Western and Chinese herbal programs. And our YouTube channel has way too much information, way too many videos. We've had a little bit of a lag that we haven't made any videos in about a month almost, I think.
There's
We're a
some new
little
ones
behind.
coming
And
this week.
so this week and next, we're just going to put some new videos up there. So be sure to subscribe, like us on Facebook, and follow us so that you can catch all of the new classes we got coming up. Many of our classes now are online. For better or worse, COVID has forced us into that. And for the longest time, we knew we needed to do it. And so now we're doing it. So, if you want to go more in depth on any of this stuff, you can. And do you have any questions? I can start on
Yeah,
a list here. I like
so
we're
I
we're
am gonna
5 minutes in. We can start talking stuff.
I do want to address if anybody, I mean
I had to
Patricia,
give you that to shout it out.
Patricia Anderson, if you had something specific about eye health, let me know, but we can start on some just general things that we know to be true. One of the first things, and Bob will talk about this more, one of the first things is we are not the people that's going to say this is the herb for that, unless it actually is. Yeah, there are some very specific herbs for things. We're going to talk about the energetics of it to get you back into balance.
What was the question?
And
Because
so just some general eye health things, and maybe
okay.
she'll be able to type in a
So
specific thing. So anything for eye health.
yeah, and I will say, there's a number of herbs that we say guide to the eyes, and that's kind of a unique idea
Mhm.
within Chinese medicine, where we talk about not this is good for, but that we can take a group of herbs and move them in a particular direction of the body.
Even guiding medicine that way,
Yeah,
if you are in pharmaceuticals.
and so we're starting to see that, yeah, in the Western, like cancer care and things like that, that they're using things to guide to a particular part of the body. And so Chinese medicine has not talked about that for a long time. And so when we look at herbs that are eye specific, we have a couple of herbs that always pop into my mind and are generally considered safe. One in particular I use a lot of is Juhua, Juhua. For any of you who speak better Chinese than me, I apologize for my pronunciation. That's chrysanthemum flour. Um, it's a lovely non-caffeinated tea, and generally very safe either as a single, but I like to add it into formulas that are specific to the individual and their particular complaint. Um, we can use it topically as well, kind of as an eye pad or an eye wash for itchy eyes in particular. Gochitsa, which is the Lycium, the wolfberry. Um, and there's another herb, Bai Ji Li, the Tribulus, are all considered very specific for the eye and guide to the eye. Oh, and Tsangzu, white, no, excuse me, black atractylodes. Most of us pronounce it Kangzu, but I believe the proper pronunciation is Sangzu. Um,
Can I add something to that?
yeah,
That black atractylodes, for all of you that know me, for those who don't, I work as a traditional healer as well as a clinician. That to the eyes with the black atractylodes, in a spiritual and emotional sense, is for clear sight, literally seeing in the dark, being able to see in the dark. And when you look at the definition of what a shamanic healer is, it's one who sees in the dark.
oh, you got it. So any of those herbs can be used to find a specific formula combination of herbs to guide those to the eyes and can be really effective. All of them, I would say, are generally safe, but it's important that we match the right herb up for the eyes. Um, there's also, for any of you who are Chinese practitioners, either acupuncturists or Chinese herbalists, there's some really nice work by Dr. Grossman. If you search for Chinese medicine eye care, it will come up. I forget his exact website. But there's also specific points around the eye that I love to give anybody who's dealing with chronic eye issues, anything from macular degeneration to detached retina to just dry, itchy eyes and allergies. There's a point that's on the leg that's GB39 that's specific for eye health. And then there's points around the eyes. And so I hate to say, you use your eyebrows and you'll find all the little divots that are here. And so if you look at, you could search for acupuncture points around the eye, but there's UB2, Yuyao, gallbladder, oh heck, what is that? Gallbladder 2, Taiyang, and then stomach 2, and there's a few other little foramens that we can find around the eye. And so stimulating those points on a daily basis can have great success for just general eye health. And then looking at those things that are detrimental to the eyes. Of course, what I'm doing right now, sitting on a computer all day long. A million years ago, I spent way too much time. I was spending 12 to 15 hours a day doing work on the computer. And I found that not only did I lose the ability to speak for about a half an hour, like the phone would ring after I'd spent a few hours on the computer. I literally couldn't speak. And eyes, vision really became challenged. And so I found that setting an alarm so that every 60 minutes to step away from a computer, go outside, look to the distance, really started to help keep me from being trapped into that kind of a scenario like that.
I'd like to add one more herb to that that's very specific and has been used for thousands of years
Yeah,
and
I
that
didn't even say
helps.
Western stuff.
Would
Yeah.
be a bilberry paste of some kind. That bilberry, both leaf and paste, is something that, like a jelly, with thousands of years referencing capillary fragility in the eyes in particular. And in World War II and One, used by any kind of fighter like especially in the UK area, because they were used to eating bilberry jam, where in Florida it doesn't grow, um, to heighten their night vision,
And
to make them more
and
accurate.
all any of the leaf or fruit in that plant genus
Yes.
actually can be effective. And so ultimately those are blueberries. And so there's a number of different plants in the vacuum in that blueberry family or genus, excuse me, that can be effective as an anti-inflammatory in particular. Um, was there anything more specific on the eye there, or we
Not
go on to the next
Not that I
questions?
saw. I
Yeah,
I, I want to make sure everybody understands that all of these things that we're giving are going to be
a little general.
generalized in that they're not going to harm you, that we wouldn't say it if it really needed to, and we'll give the caution or warning or that you should proceed to a practitioner. So bilberry would have been something that people just ate.
Yeah,
Chrysanthemum tea is something that's very normal and average for
get it in
people
a
to
tea
have,
house. Yeah.
but it's very intensely
So,
ophthalmic.
there was,
I'll take
it's,
them out if you want.
yeah, I was going to start on this one because this one I want to save towards the end, maybe, because there might be
Okay.
extra questions on there. So, there was a really interesting question. Amanda put it out there. I don't know if she's online. She was asking for sources of evidence that will be used regarding efficacy and safety. And that's a fascinating and a really
And
good
important.
question, because there are challenges. Some of the herbs that we use, um, there's a couple of different versions of herbal medicine. When we start to look at safety in particular, and herb drug interactions is one of my things that I really like to talk about that a great deal because herb drug interactions are a thing, and adverse events do happen with herbs. Luckily, people rarely die from them. And sometimes if we just look at a plant like aconite, monkshood, a deadly poison. I poisoned myself. I know it's not very fun. But in Chinese herbal medicine in particular, we process it in such a way that it's no longer toxic. And so there's a number of plants that on the surface, if we just look at the botany, may appear to be toxic. But once we start to utilize them in herbal medicine, that we detoxify them in any number of different ways. And it's funny, we don't do that a lot in the Western herbal realm anymore. There is some examples of that. Um, oh,
PubMed?
well, no, I was going to get to that.
Okay.
I can't believe I can't think of it.
I'll help you if you
Nope, I can't think of the name of it, and I'm embarrassed. It was in my head 5 minutes ago. Um, but there are examples of that, either that we use low dosage, or that when we cook them, that we denature certain toxins that are in there. Oh, actually, one we were just talking about the other day was elderberry.
Mm-hmm.
Elderberry has chemicals in there that, although in very low amounts, have a potential toxicity, especially when we just look at the chemistry of it, not the biochemistry of how it reacts in the body. And so heating that, the cyanotic, oh no, not the cyanotic,
Yes,
cyanotic
that's
compounds in
correct,
there.
Bob.
The cyanotic compounds in there are denatured with a little bit of heat. And so it makes it very safe to utilize that we even give it to children. So it is important to recognize that we're not just looking at chemistry, we're not just looking at the plant, but also how it's processed, prepared, or combined with other plants to look at the safety pattern. And in general, we look at things that are generally regarded as safe. Ginger. Although you can certainly have an adverse event with ginger, it's a food. It's something that's very safe. So there's a lot of things that are food-like, or garlic. You can hurt yourself with garlic. But it's awfully good with pasta. And so let's make sure that we identify those things that are food-like, generally safe, hard to have an adverse event with, even in therapeutic dosing, unless you have, obviously, anybody can be allergic to or sensitive to a particular plant. Um, and then we have those things that you better know how to use it properly. It's not that it's a bad plant, but it may have some level of toxicities with it. And then we have things that are potentially very dangerous and should only be used if you've had appropriate training in it. If it is vital that we use it in order to save someone's life. And we see that in the Western medical thought as well. The risk benefit ratio is one of those things we talk about. When we look at a medication, we could use chemotherapy for the flu, but it's unnecessary. The amount of side effects that come with chemotherapy outweighs that you're not going to die, you're not likely to die of the flu. And so we could just do nothing, let it run its course, and in 10 days you'd probably be fine. But untreated cancer could be very dangerous. Then chemotherapy may be appropriate in some cases. So we accept the risk benefits because obviously chemo has some nasty side effects.
Okay, so many things. Okay, so hold on.
I've opened up a can of worms.
Right. So
But I wanted to get to evidence here. But
okay, you want to finish that?
Yeah, let me finish that thought, then you can ramble at me.
Go right ahead.
So there is a great deal of research out there. The trick is to sort through it appropriately. The lousy part is they tend to be small studies. They tend to be animal or test tube studies, and not hundreds of thousands of people the way we see with certain prescription medications. Unfortunately, herbal medicine, although a multi-billion-dollar business, it's hard to patent an herb. And so there isn't much money being thrown at it. Mostly we're seeing it overseas, which doesn't always garner the level of respect that herbs should be getting. So a lot of our research is coming from places like China. We see a lot in Europe, anywhere where there's a government-controlled medical system, where there is universal health care. They're looking for the least expensive, most effective approaches. And so in places like Germany and the UK, I believe they use a lot of herbal remedies that that
Combinations.
that we will find there's some decent research, because they're not going to give it out at a pharmacy. The doctor's not going to recommend it. It doesn't work because it costs the government money, and governments are cheapskates. So they want to do it as cheap and effectively as possible. So there's a very old tome that herbalists laugh at because it's the most conservative tome out there, but it is based on research. It is done by pharmacists, not by herbalists. But the German E Commission, if they say an herb works, I would say there's pretty much a 100% guarantee that when used correctly in the appropriate dosing, that you're going to have success. If the German E Commission says it works, it does. Um, I will say that they do singles. They don't do energetics or diagnostics. They just like, here, this is for depression. This one's for pain. And so that's a appropriate but terrible starting point. um, One of my favorite places is Roy Upton has is going through a lot of our common Western herbs and looking at the American pharmacopoeia of herbalism. Those are available for purchase through him. I forget the
I'm going to type
organization.
it in for you.
And also, I'm a huge fan of the American Botanical Council. Mark Blumenthal really has done a good job, has an amazing board of advisors that he's put together, many different medical traditions, and he's been involved in the herbal industry probably since the 60s in various forms, but really has compiled a lot of the PubMed research as a lot of the overseas research, really kind of cutting edge. And when some of the negative research that herbalists, some research is appropriate, but some of it's really bad that's negative towards the industry. And you'll usually find that it's the American Botanical Council that is commenting on it. Without a doubt, we can find things overseas. Interestingly, Cuba, China, Korea, Japan, Iran, Israel, and a number of our European countries are really leading the parade in doing quality herbal research, and sometimes looking at some of the traditional cultural use of the herbs. And that's really, the research starts to fall off when we start to look at traditional medicine, how it's utilized, how it's combined on systems outside of the medical construct. And that's where it starts to get more interesting sometimes. Okay,
Okay,
now I'll shut up.
so we
And
need to go back. So
I know I opened up a whole can of worms with all of that.
okay, so back in the beginning when we were talking about the eye health, you did address that. But one of the questions that was going on is Lisa had referenced a negative thing. Have you seen a negative report having to do with vitamin D? And so that's the first question. Have
Okay.
you seen anything about any negatives having to do with vitamin D? And then the next one is, how about vitamin D and related to SARS, COVID, like that relationship
Oh.
altogether? And then the next question down, which I thought was important because it was coming from somebody who I think is an acupuncturist,
Awesome.
because of the way that it was referenced.
That's great.
That I'm going to get their name. I want to go back
That's
to
okay.
their name.
Let me start on the vitamin D,
Okay.
if that's okay.
All right.
So what we're starting to see, a lot of research is coming out with vitamin D, and it's positive, excuse me, it's positive effects. And there was some research I just saw very recently, just about a week or so ago, that came out. It was like 190,000 study where they were seeing a reduction in the infection rates with those folks. And so I generally was thinking more of its benefit reducing the symptoms and the severity of COVID. And so this study was actually looking at the reduction in spread of it. And we see, of course, higher rates of COVID and more severe cases of COVID in the Black community. As we move further north, we're seeing some pretty high infection rates there, although Florida's not exactly doing great. And so There is technically, if you look at the books, they will say there is such a thing as vitamin D toxicity. So long as you're not eating seal liver, you're probably good. What I would say is we generally look at a range, depending on whose scale you use for the vitamin D, is 30 to 30 or 32, all the way up to 100. And so, in 20 years of having most of my patients test their vitamin D levels and having people bring blood work, I've had three patients who have actually hit triple digits, in which case I said, you should stop that. You don't need vitamin D anymore. You're doing a great job. And we've seen a few isolated cases where they were testing the levels of vitamin D on lifeguards, people who got a lot of sun exposure, who generally had healthy systems, but despite some of their not healthy behaviors of lifeguards that I've known, um, that they were naturally occurring hitting around 100. And so we haven't seen a lot of cases of vitamin D toxicity. I I encourage everybody to get their vitamin D levels tested. And my goal for my patients is to get above 50, and I try to keep them under 90. So looking at that sweet spot around 70, give or take, is great. When we look at the research in reference to the COVID 19, those folks who had above 50 really had a pretty easy time compared to the folks who had very low vitamin D. And when we look at some of the studies that are still continuing to come out, that's a huge area of research. We're more likely to see the adverse effects of low vitamin D. And have never seen high vitamin D. I'm sure it exists. If somebody drank a whole bottle of it, I'm sure there would be issues. I usually start people at 5,000 IUs daily. If those numbers don't move, I'll bounce up to 10,000. I've not had to go above 10,000 to start to get that number to move. Of course, the cheapest and best source is sunlight, and most of us don't get enough. I've spent my entire day indoors today, and so I did not get any vitamin D. I wear clothes most of the time I'm outside, even though we're in Florida. For those of you who are in cloudier climes or start to get further north, especially in the wintertime, it's so important for both bone health, immune health, and even emotional health. When vitamin D is a hormone and seems to affect our emotional health. There's some, and it's funny, there's not conclusive, but I'd say it's pretty darn accepted that seasonal affective disorder, SAD, comes from a lack of sunlight. And so there is certainly a role of vitamin D in certain forms of depression. But I would say sunlight is unique in its own right, that it's more than just the vitamin D. I think there is a um, bright sunny days make us smile oftentimes.
Okay, so
What else you got?
Jerry, who could be our student, but it could just also be another Jerry, wants to know
Hey,
if
Jerry.
Li4 has any help at all that you know of for immune system issues.
Hmm.
Is that somehow related to boosting or helping our immune
So,
system?
in a roundabout way, so Li4 is right there, and you can large intestine 4. So it is a really effective both acupressure, acupuncture. You can put flower essences on there. You can put magnets on. There's so many different ways, and you can just like stimulate it. And it is part of what we call the four gates, which is a combination of points that is large intestine 4 and liver 3. Liver 3 is kind of the corresponding points in the on the feet. And we use those 2 points in combination specifically for liver qi stagnation. And one of the things that and this is a Bob thing, this isn't textbook, sorry, that all of us, especially nowadays, have some version of liver qi stagnation or stress. Stress makes us get out of bed, but when stress becomes too much, it starts to cause problems and the stagnation of qi. Um, and stress can cause a dysfunction in our immune system. And I didn't say suppression of our immune system, but a dysfunction. Because we had a couple of questions that people had already posted for us about the autoimmune disorders, I want to come back to that a little bit. Um, we also use it for facial pain. It's specific for the front of the face, toothache pain, and so forth. But it's not generally thought of as an immune boosting point per se, or immune stimulating point, or even one to maintain it, unless we're combining it with liver 3 and using it specifically because of liver qi stagnation. points that I prefer specifically for the immune system that can be effectively done with just acupressure, if you've been trained in moxibustion, um, is stomach 36, Zusan Li, and that's just below our knee, 3 shun below our patella, the lower edge of the patella. And Zusan Li, there's like, I hate to make the bad joke, but ancient Chinese saying that all diseases can be treated through Zusan Li, and stimulate that point every day to live to be 100. Check me in 100 years to see if it works. But in particular, large intestine 10 in combination with stomach 36. And large intestine 10 is just below the elbow, a smidge. That is specific to use to stimulate the immune system to prevent colds and flu. I would add to that, when we think from a Western standpoint, your immune system, the role that the lymphatic system has in that, that something as simple as gentle muscle contraction, i.e., go for a walk, stretch, bend, twist, um, uh, flex all of your large muscle groups, but more importantly, diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing. That moves 2/3 of the lymph of our body.
And where can you learn about that?
Yeah, you can find on our YouTube channel. I actually have a video on the belly breathing. And I would say the stupid things we forget: water.
Mhm.
If we are not hydrated properly, our immune system does not function well. Uh, yeah, those are biggies.
Okay, so I'm going to open up a can of worms with this question
Oh,
after
Lordy.
it from Michelle. So I'm going to have you do a real quick 2 sentences on, so people of color need to have more vitamin D.
Yes. Well, so they don't need higher amounts of vitamin D. They're more likely to be deficient. And that's a great question. And I hate to say it, it's not talked about enough. And I, here at the school, we have an intern clinic, so our students get practice seeing people from the community. But even in my regular daily practice as well, I for whatever reason, we see a lot of folks from the Black community here, and as a whole, they're underserved. They're underserved in Western medicine. They're underserved in herbal medicine, and honestly, they're particularly underserved in Chinese medicine. We talk about liver young rising, that you have a red face, or look for the color red. Well, guess what? Color red doesn't show up on Black people as red. It shows up on white people as red. And so it's important. It was funny. I just saw there's a book written recently by a medical student in uh, no, different person.
Oh, okay.
This guy was in medical school to become an MD. I believe he was African. And he was shocked that all of the pictures and all of the conversations and all of the medical books that were for the medical students were for white people. And so he was like, how do I recognize these diseases in my culture and my people? And the biggest difference, and there's so much written about the misconceptions of highly trained medical professionals that's just absurd. But the big difference between me and somebody of African descent is the amount of melanin in my skin, which is a specialized cell that makes somebody's skin darker or not.
And that
And so
allows them to make their own vitamin D or not.
and so the melanin is actually protective from the UV rays of the sun. And so somebody with darker skin still will sunburn, but not as fast as I will, because I'm pretty damn pale these days. So the problem with the larger amount of melanin, somebody with darker skin, is they need to spend longer and have more skin exposed in order to get the same amount of vitamin D. And the problem is, people, whether you're Caucasian or African American or anything else, none of us are spending the amount of time outside that we're supposed to. We're in working on our computers, doing open forums, seeing patients, and so none of us are seeing the sunlight enough. And for somebody with darker skin, they need more than I do. So they are more likely. It was in the early 90s because we had the advent of video games for the first time. And there's something unique in the Black community where sometimes lighter skin is better, sometimes darker skin. It's more of a cultural issue. And so at the time it was, they were trying to avoid the sunlight. So what we saw, and a lousy source of vitamin D is also dairy or milk, which a lot of people of African and Asian descent are sensitive to dairy. Um, So we were seeing rickets, which is actually the extreme of vitamin D deficiency. It was primarily in the Black community and not in the white community, but we were even starting to see a few cases in the white community. So important that anybody of Asian, or excuse me, African descent in particular, that they get their vitamin D levels tested to ensure that they're not getting just barely passing, but actually getting the best score, I would say above 50 on
Okay, so I'm gonna answer a question.
that.
Okay, so here, I'm going to answer a question because I want Bob to be able to answer Michelle's question that is going to be long because it's a great question, but has a lot of detail to it, and it has to do with Chinese medicine as well as Western herbalism. So I want that to get heard because that was a great question for all of our practitioners and everybody involved. So real quick, let me answer Lisa's vitamin D question. So one of Lisa's things that went with the vitamin D as well was, other than supplementation, herbally, can we enhance it in some way? And my answer for that from a Western standpoint is absolutely positively yes. And we teach this in herb school, that if you want to break through the rocks, if you want to get the minerals out of your plants, that you're going to need some kind of help. You're going to need really good stomach acid, probiotics, or need some kind of bitters that are going to help to dislodge that. That also would be a reason to use vinegar in a tincture to get those minerals out. So one of our best plants for doing that, for getting calcium and getting bone building things and helping our body process minerals and hormones, which is what vitamin D actually is, would be nettles or oat straw that had then been put into vinegar, or you had really good stomach acid. That's going to help you use all of your minerals properly and all of your hormones properly. That would be the herbal enhancement to that, using that vitamin D, which is actually a hormone, properly. Okay.
And I'll add to that. Most of our food sources are actually fortified, which I think is BS for crappy. Um, uh, Fortified with vitamin D2. The preferred form is D3, and opinions vary on that. Um, but one food source is mushrooms. That if you expose mushrooms to sunlight, they will start to accumulate D2. So it is a food source that you can start to get that. Also, there's some research. The Vitamin D Council is a really good place, although they kind of make some huge leaps that don't always turn out to be true. But they are oftentimes, the Vitamin D Council is looking at some of the cutting edge research in vitamin D. And there's a lot of conjecture of, like, even people with a good tan are sometimes low in vitamin D. And so they're looking at both the gut flora and the skin flora. So the good bacteria that live on our skin
100%.
may
Good
have a
job.
role in our ability to transfer sunlight, the UV rays, into usables that our specialized cells in our skin can then convert that into usable D3 or the vitamin D hormone. And
Okay.
there was a longer question you
Yeah,
said.
so this is a good one. Take a
Lordy.
drink. Okay, so Michelle is asking, this is a wonderful question. There's two parts to it. She is asking, how do we integrate Chinese and Western herbalism together within assessment or quotation mark treatment plans? And I like the quotation marks because that means she knows to say not to treat. Yeah,
Is
I
this our
love it.
Michelle or a different
So
Michelle?
the different one.
Okay.
Yeah. So how do we integrate Chinese and Western herbalism with assessment and treatment plans? And wondering how you feel or what you think a good sourcing thing is with Chinese herbs, considering how sometimes we worry about pollution
Yeah.
from the Asian
No.
corridor. How do you feel about
Yeah.
that? Do you have good sources? So the first thing
I
is
have the
about
secret.
combining the assessment plans, which
Yeah.
I think we do a really good job at, because
Yeah.
plants are plants are
Yeah.
plants. And
You
yeah,
know, and so let me, yes, it is two parts.
and
So
I'll
let me,
try to hold you in the,
yeah, no,
yeah,
let me start with part one. Um, and I think they integrate well.
yes,
And just take your brain, throw it in a blender, hit it on like frappe, and then no. The reality is, it's helpful to have one of those as your primary approach. So I like to think I was a Western herbalist long before I was a Chinese herbalist. And I almost choose which one will become dominant in my approach. And so with certain issues, I will choose Western, other issues, and I would say the more complex issues, I oftentimes use the Chinese system, both in evaluation and actually formulation. And some of the ones that are where adaptogens and nervines and nourishing the body in very gentle ways. Where somebody enjoys drinking teas or would prefer a tincture, I tend to take a more Western approach. And sometimes I'll even change midstream. And I think there are benefits to almost the openness and expansiveness of Western. I actually like the functional medicine. I think that provides insight. The blood work is amazing. Like otherwise, I have to go and guess: is it B12 or is it iron deficiency if they're anemic? Genetic testing is magical. And so sometimes it's helpful to explain things through that perspective. I'm a big fan of looking at low stomach acid, our ability to process those foods and nutrients that we take in. But I like the preciseness that exists within the Chinese medicine construct. I like the formulation that is 1,000 years old with the predetermined adjustments. Um, I actually think that Western sometimes does a better job at some of the behavior modification, some of the things that we can easily incorporate into our normal dietary practices. So, literally, if you like, I prefer the tongue and pulse diagnosis of Chinese, then all we do is use that for assessment. And we can change that languaging. In Chinese medicine, we talk about spleen qi deficiency, and that has to do with the transformation and transportation and the digestive function, our immune and the yin qi. And that's awesome. But we could also just go, you know what? I just want part of that. I'm just going to talk about that center of the tongue is just digestion. And we can change our languaging with that. And the trick is trying to self-learn that. If for a Western herbalist to self-teach yourself Chinese is super challenging. There are a few programs out there. Yay, us!
Ours.
We're the best. But there's other people like Michael Tierra that try to integrate those two nicely, and some of the
Me and
others.
David.
And yeah, David to a point has more detailed, and I'm sure there's other ones out there. Patricia Howell does a nice job, I believe. And so having somebody to formally train you and provide some guidance with that is super helpful. Um, and if we can write it any way we want. If I say I need to improve your digestion, and in my head I'm thinking spleen qi deficiency, and I know what that all looks like, or if I just look at a phlegmatic state, if you're looking for that Western energetic or some of the Greek approaches, I can still think phlegm from a Chinese or from a Greek phlegm statute kind of idea. So really choose one as your primary for at least a particular client, and use that as your foundation, and don't feel limited by the herbs that you can bring in for a particular person or foods. I personally, and a lot of people disagree with me, I really like the 2 volume set of Peter Holmes. There we go, Energetics of Western Herbs. I think there's a learning curve on learning how to use his book
You
effectively.
must read the beginning.
Yeah, reading the beginning and using some mental editing of some of the stuff that I just don't find to be true. But I would say I am horribly opinionated of everybody's book, and so I think he does a better job, a more expansive job than most. But always trust your own experience with those herbs. And the second part was, oh, good sources.
Yeah.
Um, so there are issues with herbs coming from a variety of places: China, India. Even a lot of our Western herbs are grown in the ex-Soviet bloc, the Eastern European nations, where pollution has been and continues to be an issue. Inappropriate sourcing of things from drainage ditches, even here in the US, can be a problem. So, one of the things we need to look for in the people we're buying herbs from is some level of guarantee, i.e., certificate of analysis, or we can send our own herbs out for certificate of analysis uh, to ensure that some level of testing is being done. In a perfect world, you visit sites. Nowadays, with Google Earth, you can kind of visit some sites. One of the places I source our powdered concentrates, the 5-to-1 concentrate, is Legendary Herbs, and we literally the people who run that company wrote the book on looking at powders. he has a Google Earth camera where you can go and look at the farm and you can see whether there's smokestacks next to it or a drainage issue you're not happy with. Um, I believe that for the raw herbs, there are some companies that are doing a good job. Um, Mayway and who's got the triple, the three yellows, the golden yellow?
Spring Winds.
Spring Winds, yeah. Spring Winds probably has the highest quality, but has limited access. You can actually source their certificate of analysis online usually, and they'll tell you if there's trace amounts of anything, because ultimately there is a amount on all herbs of certain pesticides and heavy metals and so forth. There, most places you went to far exceed the U.S. standards. The Germans have probably one of the highest standards. I believe Australia has the second highest standard. The U.S. falls somewhere in the middle of the pack. Of course, there's counterfeit stuff information, so we do the best we can and then verify. So we periodically send our herbs out to an independent lab to get testing. Um, there is a movement of growing Chinese herbs here in the U.S. in similar climate and soil conditions, and it's a growing movement. The problem is they're more expensive, and we see that. Sorry, I'm going to show my age here. I remember when CD players first came out, and to get a CD player in your car, one of my friends got one. It was a 5 disc CD changer that had to go in the trunk and cost him like $3,000 because it was the very first one ever made. So as we see these herbs being grown organically and similar, and they're testing out very similar, they're super expensive. And right now, the distributors out there, the only person I know of, and there may be others, but this is the only one I know of, is Golden Needle. So Golden Needle online with Barry. He's putting his money where his mouth is, and so he's buying those when they come in from this collective of small farms that are growing Chinese herbs here in the U.S. They're growing organically and or certified organic. Um, and unfortunately they're pricey, and so I make a point whenever I can afford it to buy some, because if nobody buys the crops being grown here in the US, nobody's going to grow it, and so then we're reliant on those herbs coming from China. The good thing is China has started to clean up slowly and steadily. They're cleaning up their environment. We are seeing more organic coming from some of the certified organic, USDA certified organic, which is not as great a standard as it used to be, but it's better than a stick in the eye. So Mayway now has organic, New Herbs now has organic. And I would say both of those companies, and of course Spring Wind they all have done a really good job of making sure that the product is authentic, i.e. it's what it says it is. And they're doing a very good job of making sure that there is minimal tested pesticides, heavy metals, yeast, fungus, mold kind of things. And so I any company you may find a bad batch, but generally I find that they do a really good job, all of them. But ultimately, I would love for all of them to grow here.
Okay, so take a breath, and I'm going to address something in particular. Um,
And I'm not paid by any of those companies, although I am friends with Barry.
No. And so Melanie, I see that you had sent in a question, and I'm going to go ahead and say out loud how I already answered you, because I privately answered you, not realizing that you diligently put it on the list.
Yeah.
And it's such a can of worms.
But yeah, let me go for that, because I did want to get to the list ones.
Okay, you shouldn't, because we have some combinations that are still
Okay.
not addressed from here that
Okay.
combine with these.
Okay, good.
So
Yeah.
real quick, Melanie, and I'll get back to it as much as possible. And if you send more in, but I think that I gave you like a good sheet for it, I'll let you know. And one of the things is, and this could be a multiple day, 6-week seminar on just cancer care in general.
Actually, I think you got a weekend long intensive coming up on that.
I do have a weekend long intensive coming up on support of cancer care, both with medication and pharmaceutical intervention and without, and what we can do best in both situations, and safety and all of that. But what I had advised her, if anybody is watching the feed, is just there's certain mushrooms that we always include in any kind of health having to do, even if it's 4-stage with cancer care and support, because they're considered foods. They're usually not poo-pooed by the doctors in any way. Because of the food consideration, they usually don't have any interaction with any kind of pharmaceutical intervention. So they're very, very safe. And we see a good amount of statistics to the reduction of tumor area and the repair of cells. So they're the basis that we go through. And one of the things that she had mentioned was just when you have any kind of issues with terminal care or extended chronic illness of any kind, you're just worn out, like autoimmune, all kinds of things that would just cause us to be chronic. And so I did advise a pre-done syrup that's already double decocted for you. Otherwise, as herbalists, we would just do it ourselves, and we really work a lot with mushrooms.
Yeah.
So that is what you're seeing on the feed. If you're watching that, you're seeing a brand that we trust. That is a pre-done formula that we do teaspoon doses of a day, and have seen correlations in tumor reduction.
And I want to talk a little bit, just because the word cancer got popped in there,
and Chinese medicine, we don't really think of it as cancer
yeah,
either, and so
lemon chi and blood stagnation.
yeah.
But the reality is, there's different ways. Mushrooms in particular, we can see a lot of supporting the system, and then we can see some that seem to have a lot of research in helping to optimize the immune system in order for it to reduce tumor loads and so forth. And one that always comes up is turkey tails and chaga, both of which are commonly used for a variety of different types of cancer, and not a standalone treatment. It's like, nope, you're not going to go wrong with either of those. Turkey tails, very easy to source, fairly inexpensive. Chaga is expensive, and price does come into play often. The cordyceps and reishi mushrooms I frequently use during chemotherapy. Radiation's a whole new animal because there's a whole new thought process that oncologists are using with that. But I generally use the reishi mushroom to maintain the platelets and RBCs, the red blood cells, and I use the cordyceps to maintain the white blood cells. Because if somebody's going through chemotherapy, I want them to follow that protocol as carefully as possible and for it to be as effective as possible and to follow through with the continuity of care that the oncologist prescribed. And one of the things that interferes the most with their continuing with their care is when their white blood cells or their red blood cells or platelets drop. They have to stop, and whilst they use other medications or they're able to just recover a little bit. One of the things that's come up a lot, and unfortunately, a lot of people see me after they've gone through chemo and they try to crowdsource their information on the internet. And so they do a lot of juicing or bitter herbs while going through chemo. And what I find is they come through with no symptoms and no benefits from the chemotherapy because it pushes out the chemo. So I would say eat super healthy, but don't do a lot of herbal care without an experienced clinical herbalist. If you're going through chemo or preparing to go through chemo, with radiation, opinions vary, but one of the ideas that they're now putting out there, and it's hard to argue with it, I don't agree, but I always say, like, nope, I'm going to support the people whilst they go through, and everybody gets to make their own choices. But radiation, they don't want any high nutrient vitamins, minerals, vitamin C, or antioxidant herbs because they're trying to oxidize the system. And so anything that's antioxidant is working against the radiation. So I'm not sure I agree with that, but for the short period of time that they use radiation, if my clients choose to go through doing radiation, then I just support them as best I can through that. And we use some topical herbs and so forth that the oncologists seem to be accepting the use of that.
Okay, so I'm going to I'm going to keep you on task for it.
Yes,
and I'm going to try to incorporate several that are
Yeah,
here
there's a
as well as
couple.
on, and they
Yeah.
kind of go together.
Awesome.
But I do want you to, I want you to meter yourself with this because it's going to be complicated because it's about gut issues and goo syndrome.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, so we have several things going on that are both online and not. So Melly asked specifically about some metabolic shutdown and lupus, but it's all about autoimmune.
Yeah, I saw we had another.
So we had
Lisa, I think, had something.
four autoimmune gut IBS syndrome questions. But one of the ones which I thought was very specific is, does Chinese medicine or acupuncture help with IBS or leaky gut type syndromes? And then there was a secondary of, can we help herbally with leaky gut / IBS syndromes? And then a third and fourth, how can we look at goo syndrome, and I wanted to clarify. I wanted to clarify with her that was goo worms, and she says not sure, just goo syndrome in
Same thing.
relationship to autoimmune.
Okay.
And so it kind of,
All right. Let me
so
start
let's
from.
start with the digestive and
Let,
then move our way down.
let me talk.
Okay.
Let me start almost
Because I
more
want
west.
Melly to get her
Yeah.
answer as well.
I'm gonna mix and match here
And
a little bit.
I'll bring you back to
Yeah.
this.
So, all
Mhm.
right, I got to
So
sit back for
autoimmune,
this.
okay, so ready?
No, I got it.
Does TCM address leaky gut and
Yeah.
IBS? Let's start
Yeah.
with that was the first.
So, all right. Yeah, I'll start
We'll
there.
start with there in
So,
autoimmune.
I agree with. I sounded like a couple people.
But you see what I'm
I see
saying?
there's a correlation
Yeah.
between autoimmune disorders, some autoimmune disorders, and the concept. And it's so funny. We've been saying leaky gut for 50 years
And
or
people don't
whatever.
even believe that
And
exists.
right, and so we were made fun of by the Western medical community, and so we started calling it gut permeability issues, and all of a sudden it sounds way more medical and cool. So if you want more respect from your doctor, talk about gut permeability or intestinal permeability issues. Sorry, it's just a bad joke on my own part. Um, so yes, Chinese medicine does address it, and we frequently will see the concepts of spleen qi deficiency with phlegm. We'll see yin deficiency, and the yin deficiency could be anywhere from stomach yin to small intestine, large intestine yin deficiency, and you can get any number of different combinations with that and layers of it. When we look at irritable bowel syndrome, we also have to, I'm sorry, and I'm mixing and matching. And so within Western medicine, when we look at irritable bowel, it's important to remember there are three types of irritable bowel syndrome. IBS-D, IBS-A, or so D is diarrhea, alternating, or constipation. So somebody will have one of those frequently, and sometimes I've actually seen where there's two, where there's uh, alternating, or they have constipation that comes out every 3 days as diarrhea, and that may be from medications and so forth. And so when we look at IBS, that may or may not be the same as leaky gut or gut permeability issues. So IBS, the alternating in particular, is the definition of liver qi stagnation. And so the alternating aspect, we think of the liver in Chinese medicine being the regulatory organ. So I frequently see there's some aspect of either middle jiao stagnation or liver dysregulation, or looking at five element system, liver attacking spleen and or stomach. Um, when we start to look at IBS-D, the diarrhea, that could be anything from food stagnation, which would be somewhat aligned with the idea of leaky gut as well. I forgot about food stagnation. We may see spleen qi or spleen yang deficiency, and maybe even kidney yang deficiency. And with constipation, then we're seeing either an excess heat or yin deficiency or blood deficiency causing the constipation. And so it gets more challenging because a IBS is a symptom that shows an overall imbalance of the body. And so it's important that we look at all of the combination of stuff. But let me come back now and say it in a Western construct. So, and I will say Chinese herbal medicine does a great job of dealing with IBS and kind of leaky gut. I think it does better when we morph the Western and Chinese thoughts together. And I'll come back to that on leaky gut. Acupuncture will have good success in particular for the alternating constipation and diarrhea. It will have the herbs, I think, are predominant for the constipation and diarrhea. The acupuncture might be more, at least equal in its strength on the alternating. When it comes to leaky gut, and
From Western, you were
from a
saying.
Western standpoint, yeah, the idea that there's a gut permeability that either through the overuse of antibiotics or too much yummy foods
Or
like sugar,
exposure maybe to chemicals.
exposure to chemicals, that would be me. I'm a desert. If you don't know, I'm a Desert Storm vet, and sucking too much burning oil wells and all the other fun stuff that they've done created a variety of what I would say gut permeability issues, allergies, food sensitivities, and so forth. Has been an ongoing struggle for me that's gotten way better than it was 30 years ago. Um, and so what we see is there's oftentimes a multi-level issue that whether we're looking at the mucosal membrane over the organ itself, the intestines themselves, whether we're looking at the degradation of the villi, the little fingers that come up, and you've got this slimy coating in there. So sometimes these degrade, especially when we see something like celiac disease. Um, and if our gut flora, which live in that mucosal membrane, so here's all the good bacteria all live in this slimy little coating that allows the poop to go through and the chyme to get the contraction of the bowel through there. So if that's not all functioning correctly, if the good bacteria are not part of that effective breakdown and absorption of nutrients, we get a whole new set of issues there. And so we may see things like small intestinal bowel overgrowth, candida. We may end up with low stomach acid. The ghrelin, which is part of our signaling system, may start to go out of whack, and we get a whole new set of issues. So I think it's important, if we're looking at it from a Western standpoint, that we recognize some of those issues. And I think as a Chinese herbalist, as a Chinese acupuncturist, if we just look at, and I hate to say that, there's a lot of acupuncturists, a lot of Chinese herbalists who get so blinders on that there is only Chinese medicine. We ignore all Western thought and alternative Western thought. I think we miss a lot of stuff. And so if we don't recognize the role of probiotics, if we don't recognize the damage caused by antibiotics, and start to recognize that even though there may be spleen qi deficiency, it is being caused by a food sensitivity that's causing our loose stools and undigested foods. That if we don't put some soothing mucilaginous marshmallow in there to start to just cause some reduction of that, if we don't use antihistamine like herbs like nettles, that we're going to struggle. And I find so many Chinese herbalists and acupuncturists struggle with things like the leaky gut syndrome. They just don't understand it because it doesn't perfectly fit into the Chinese paradigm. You can do a few contortions and make it fit and make some crap up. But the reality is, I think there's a lot to be said for that functional medicine understanding of leaky gut syndrome. So sometimes we have to put some killie herbs in there, and pardon for my vagueness, but things that are high in berberine, that can be the three huangs.
Oregon
That can
grapefruit,
be Oregon grapefruit. That can be
gentian.
gentian. Yeah,
And
lots
this,
of cold bitter, but we can add warming bitters to kill off that intestinal overgrowth that's right below the stomach and the small intestine. It's creating this ongoing inflammation. Sorry, I could go on for days about GI stuff.
I'm going to keep you on track.
Yes, thank you.
Hmm.
So it's important that we recognize what's going on. There are now tests that you can do that are fairly non-invasive to look for things like SIBO. We can do um, poop analysis to see what the gut, the good bacteria is doing in the gut, where the imbalances are. And then we can get very specific. There's even companies like Claire where you can customize your probiotic blends. But we can go as simple as, like, if you've got loose
Nettles and
stools,
calendula.
yeah, and calendula is
Hmm.
a huge role in this. Plantain has a
Knitting it
role.
back together.
But things like Saccharomyces, recognizing that specific yeast and bacteria are necessary. So Saccharomyces better for loose stools, where other bacterium and soil bacterium may be better for the constipation. So it is definitely a, I won't say hard, but I think it requires us to work with leaky gut, to work with any type of IBS, that we do a good energetic understanding, but we should look at the history, the use of antibiotics, the exposure to chemicals, and recognize that we need to think a little bit diversity and integrate those two systems, both a functional kind of approach as well as an energetic, whether it's Chinese or Ayurvedic or Western energetics. Um, both of those have a vital role in being successful in knitting that gut back together and creating a healthy gut once again. And that can take, I hate to say this, it can take years. And because I am far from perfect, that I am my own worst enemy when it comes to my own leaky gut issues. So, nope, I'm perfect when I'm perfect, but I'm not perfect. Follow that thought.
Okay, so
Ah,
I'm
I
gonna,
think I answered most of that
well, no,
vaguely.
I'm gonna make it
Oh,
specific. I'm gonna direct
oh, I
you.
didn't do goo worms. Yeah.
No, no, hold on. Glue worms is gonna be third down the road. So we're gonna address three or four of the continuance of that conversation.
Okay.
I want to eventually have, and if Melly's listening, Melly we know and we have access to. So Melly, if you private message me, I will try to push this farther because that's so complicated. I want you to get help. But we're going to address a little bit of autoimmune, and then we can kind of move that specifically to some lupus issues.
Go ahead.
So the autoimmune, I think, is really important. Is as a whole, do you have an approach to
Yeah.
autoimmune conditions, like a generic thing that is there a generic denominator in that? Is everybody always have food allergies or
Yeah.
things like that, or is it very specific to each person? And I know the answer is both, but there
Yeah.
are some things that are common that we all have in common
Yeah.
with
So that
autoimmune health.
it is, there's not a single autoimmune, like just do this and you'll be fine. I wish it was that easy. I have found there are many triggers for autoimmune disorders, and the list of autoimmune disorders that when we teach pathology, one of the things we look at is the autoimmune disorders. There's over 100 different autoimmune disorders, and things like schizophrenia are now thought to be an autoimmune disorder. So, like that list is really long when we say the word autoimmune disorder. Um, I find that sometimes it's genetic, sometimes it's stress, sometimes it's uh, food related, and sometimes it's environmental exposure to toxins and things like that. Um, and so, and I'm sure there's some things in there that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. And so I would say any and all of those can be, oh, and we can look at things like MTHFR that seems to increase, the genetic mutation that it doesn't allow for the proper methylation and it screws up the mitochondria function. So we see some increased risk factors when we look at the MTHFR gene. And I would say even stupid things like low stomach acid seems to increase it. Malnutrition, and like, how can anybody in our environment be malnourished? We're the overfed, and the reality is we have lots of stuff taking up space in our pie hole, but the reality is it tends to be low in nutrients, and we're finding that hormones are being dysregulated as a culture as things go on. And so many of our secretions, and whether we look at sexual hormones like testosterone decreasing, fertility rates, sperm production, the increase in menstrual cycle disorders, but we're also seeing things like lower stomach acid coming on, and that has a dramatic role. You can keep eating, and a lot of our overeating is people starving despite the amount of food that they eat because they're not extracting the nutrients necessary. So, my general approach is if we're able to ascertain the cause of an autoimmune disorder. If it's stress, well, how are we going to mitigate stress? If it's food sensitivities or malabsorption or malnutrition, how do we combat those things? If it's genetic, then we're probably closer to the management rather than trying to fix or put into remission permanently. So it's really important that we try to do our best guess as to how come particular issue happened. I think every single person who struggles with an autoimmune disorder, no matter what it is, will find that there's two triggers for a flare up. And that's usually what we talk about: remission or a lack of symptoms, a lack of progression of the autoimmune disorder where the body's attacking a particular tissue state. And in a flare up, and a flare up is all of a sudden it becomes active, it starts to actively attack those particular tissues. And so we immediately recognize there's two different states of being. And that means we need two completely different approaches. One to deal with them whilst it's in remission to try to prevent flare ups. So we have to recognize what's the cause of flare ups. And then we need another one for, oh crap, it got out of control. I shouldn't have had that glass of wine. I shouldn't have gone into that stressful situation, whatever it may be. So we need two different approaches. And if we can train the client, and most people with an autoimmune recognize, like, oh, I shouldn't have had pizza last night. I know I'm going to be suffering tomorrow. That they can recognize those first set of symptoms as it starts to flare up, that they can start that secondary formula to help mitigate symptoms to put it back into remission at that time. And so, as a general rule, and now I'm going to say energetic. So, stress and food tend to be the things that cause flare ups. So, we can use nourishing herbs that help with spleen qi deficiency and regulating herbs that help to regulate the qi tend to be in the realm of prevention. In a Western thought, we can look at nervines and adaptogens and nourishing herbs would again be our approach from that. When we look at the other side, oh crap, I'm in a flare up. It tends to show up as heat, phlegm, blood stagnation, and sometimes wind. So when we start to see spasticity, that's a type of flare up. And so we're going to use appropriate formulas depending on how their flare ups show up. And we have to be careful because if you use too many cold herbs, you use too many drying herbs, we can cause our own set of problems. So sometimes we're creating a combination. Things that specifically, the gut seems to be the root of all evil for a lot of issues. So for like RA, rheumatoid arthritis, I have yet to have seen a case where it was not food caused.
That's what I wanted you to say.
And so I frequently see food sensitivities are the cause of many other ones. And so I can't say every autoimmune disorder is caused by that, but RA, I'm going to say I can usually find out the food. Certainly gluten leads that parade, but corn, dairy are common. Eggs are more often than I like to say.
Exposure to fake sweeteners, fake
Yes, all of
colorings,
our fake
and fake
colorings. Yeah,
preservatives.
fake stuff, the stuff that you can't pull out of the ground and eat or chase
Stuff
down.
you don't think about that's in your seasonings. When you have seasoning blends, you need
Yeah.
to not have blends anymore and have singles.
So it's important to see, sure, if you have stress and you can put it, you're like, I wasn't stressful, I just went out to dinner. Then we need to chase those things down. And sometimes it requires an elimination diet, sometimes it requires laboratory testing. I hate to say it, my running joke is, what's your favorite food? It's that. And that's a smart ass comment, but the reality is it's sometimes the thing we consume the most. Things to also consider are things like nightshades. It's not as common as something like gluten, but it's more common than I think we usually talk about, and it seems to be becoming more common than I had seen 20 years ago. And it's super important. One of the most popular herbs out there right now is ashwagandha. It's an Ayurvedic herb, sometimes called Indian ginseng. Ashwagandha is a nightshade,
And flares,
and,
people.
and it will cause a flare up of conditions. And I've argued with some practitioners over the years that there's none of the solanase chemical that's in the root, and all I know is I have people who take the root and get a flare up. So I don't care what somebody's read in a lab report or PubMed. My clinical experience says that I watch ashwagandha root flare people up when there's no other thing. The other one that people forget about that I believe is in the plant family, and on two occasions I've seen gochitsa, goji berries, lycium. We have in Florida here, it's called Christmas tree berry. Is a nightshade and can cause flare ups. Lupus.
Okay, so let me be specific for you because Melly says like a joke. I got a tall order for Bob, the perspective. Like curious to hear a useful perspective on things to steer clear of, herbs that may help or prevent or soothe
Yeah,
a lupus flare specific to face rash,
yeah.
digestive mayhem, metabolic shutdown, joint pain, hormone imbalance, or extreme
Piece of
fatigue.
cake. Uh,
Yeah, and so I underlined them so you could
yeah,
see
no,
if
I,
you
I
felt like
remember that one.
addressing.
So, and let's just talk about lupus. And so it's a good example of an autoimmune disorder.
And when in flare and when not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it is one of those things that there's a couple of different types of lupus, if you will, that's remittent and blah blah blah. I figured all the four different names for it, but basically, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's actively progressive, sometimes it's not. So. One of the unique characteristics and defining characteristics is the butterfly rash, and it can be very minor to very severe, where it almost looks like really bad acne and almost scarring. And it is very much matches the one of the key diagnostic ideas in Chinese medicine is the Malar Flush, and the Malar is this is their malar bone right here. And so when we see a redness here and that butterfly rash, sorry, I'm not a good artist, is kind of like this. It hits the malar bone and comes down a little bit and kind of attaches across or up to the nose. And so that's defines yin deficiency. And so with lupus in particular, we frequently see a type of yin deficiency, yin being the cooling, moistening, nourishing fluids of the body. And that doesn't mean drink more water, but it does mean find those herbs that tend to moisten and nourish and not drying herbs. And I wish I could say there was like, here, just do this formula. It would cover all of it. But we have this idea of dryness in Western thought as well. So deficient and dry. So we use things like milky oats, oat tops, oat straw, wherever, whatever you can source. We have our marshmallows. We have our Solomon seal. Within the herbal realm, that things have, and even actually your American ginsengs are all very nourishing, moistening, building kind of herbs, and especially with lupus, something like the milky oats is so specific for it. I would argue the Solomon seal is very specific for it because we can see some of the spasticity that comes from it. So very much looking at those tendons and muscles. Within Chinese medicine, there are foundational yin deficiency formula for liver yin deficiency, which it tends to be there, is the six flavor Romania, Luwei Dihuangwan, and there's 1,000 variations of that specifically looking at how it shows up. The problem with all of these is the treatment of choice in Western medicine is steroids, which screws up all. It works. It does a good job. You won't be suffering it while you're taking the steroids, but it suppresses the immune system. It screws up the gut. It causes the gut permeability that we just beat to death. Um, and some of the immunosuppressants, methotrexate, and some of these other things that are going to open you up to all kinds of nasty other chronic diseases like leukemia and God knows what else. It's a long list of scary things that come with some of those immunosuppressants. So I'm not a fan of those unless you have to have them. And I would say the starting point is the food and trying to repair the gut and looking at those cooling, nourishing, moistening herbs for those times when you're not in flare up. And then looking at things that are a little bit more aggressive. And here's the interesting thing, things that you might think of for colds and flu uh, are oftentimes effective for those flare ups. Within Chinese medicine, it's almost easier for me to spout those off. But things like Yin Chao Jiedu Pian uh, are super effective if you're getting swelling that is associated with it. You can even look at some of the things like Xuan Lian, the Andographis formula. I usually end up creating something unique for the flare ups for an individual because there's always a unique combination of things that go on. One of the other hard parts, and I'm just going to speak to it briefly, is for so many people who really it's kind of gotten out of control and it's easy to have that happen. You feel like hell, so we all go to the comfort foods, which make us feel more like crap, and it becomes this nasty little cycle. And so you're on this, sometimes huge dosages of steroids. And just as you start, you're ramping, you start up really high on the steroids and they're dosing you down over a couple of weeks, and you get down to that last 5 milligrams, and boom, you flare up again, you go back up on 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, whatever, and then you start dosing back down. You never get it past that last 5 or 10 milligrams. There are herbs that we can use to help you step a little bit slower off of those that tends to keep the cortisol level high that makes the steroid work better. And so we have to be careful with any of these. Should be done with a practitioner for those of you who are more experienced. You can use Smilax, that's Tufuling, Smilax medica, sarsaparilla in Jamaica, has steroidal-like actions. We can use Tribolus, which is by Ji Li, but my favorite is licorice, Gansao. And we have a specific formula in Chinese medicine, Xiaoyao Gansao Tang, which is a combination of white peony by Xiao and Gansao licorice. And so you can get that as a pre-made formula, and I'll start that at around that last couple of days of dosage before you start to get the flare up, and use that to lengthen the amount of time that that steroid is in your body, and we're able to dose people down effectively whilst we're changing their food, whilst we're helping to modify some of those other issues and nourishing the body to prevent those flare-ups. Hopefully, I kind of answered the question on the lupus.
Oh, so yes, I'm laughing at that too. So Ashley says, so when is that weekend intensive on autoimmune scheduled?
I'll work
Yes,
on it.
yes, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna let you decide how you want to approach the next couple ones.
Yeah.
So in a general sense, thyroid approaches. We still have this to deal with right here, which is
Yeah.
a really good one, and then that.
Oh, let me do this. This one was easy. It was written on another. It was actually Jim in Kentucky wrote something on like the clinical herbalist website. So, and I'll tell you what, it's super challenging. So it's like, what's your favorite reference for postmenopausal menopausal weight loss and blood pressure issues? And it's funny, we see those three things, right? So weight gain, menopause, and blood pressure, all like
One begets the
55
other
to
begets the
60 and
other.
boom,
Yes.
everything blows up and like what the hell happened. And so it's super challenging to address this, and this isn't new. This is not a modern age thing necessarily. I think this is something that we've seen going on for 100 years or so. And I'm going to say that you're supposed to put on a few pounds at menopause. And
That's why all the goddess statues look
yes,
curvy. That's the
and
point.
so as the ovaries start to slow down in the production of estrogen, our body actually puts on a little bit of extra weight, ideally around the thighs and the butt. The pear versus the apple is preferable and generally considered healthy menopause, postmenopausal. And so I can't change society's jacked up views of what weight and normal and natural should be. And I know everybody wants to be what they look like at 18 when they're 60. Um, I would say it's healthier to uh, embrace a normal natural body image, but too often it does go too far. And it becomes where it's no longer a healthy weight. And that can cause things like the cholesterol and inflammation and diabetes. All of that obviously starts to factor into there. So when we look at weight gain in Chinese medicine, and I'll start there because I checked you out, Jim. I don't think you're a Chinese herbalist,
I was
so
gonna say
I
I
think
can give. I know
and
Western references that we can give at the end.
yeah, but I'll put some of that in because I'm going to actually come back and look more at Western herbs than Chinese in this particular case. So part of it is when we look at excess weight, when there's weight we don't want, we call it phlegm in Chinese medicine. And it may often, because food choices, things that we could get away with at 20, we can't get away with at 60. There may be some food modification, or we see a reduction in all of the secretions of the body, especially postmenopausal. And so stomach acid oftentimes declines. And so looking at, because we also, along with that, we usually see acid reflux, except it's not from an excess acid. I love how everything in your body declines as you age, except for acid, which magically starts to become massively produced and excessive. The reality is, most of the people I see past the age of 50, male or female, it usually is low stomach acid, not high. And so I hate to say it, we can test that with
You're opening up a can of worms with
HCl.
that.
I know. So when we look at that, making sure that there is healthy digestion and explore the idea of phlegm and food stagnation in Chinese medicine. And I'm going to come back around. There's a Chinese herb that is one of our favorites for both phlegm and food stagnation called Chanza, which you know in Western herbal medicine as hawthorn. And so we use the hawthorn berry. The Chinese don't use the leaf and flower. I think the leaf and flower is actually a better choice. In particular, when we look at blood pressure, one of the um, great choices and great uses of hawthorn berry and leaf and flower in Western herbal medicine is for blood pressure. But I would add, I think a lot of those blood pressure issues that come from that, yes, it may be from weight, it may be from blood sugar and inflammatory factors and things like that. I honestly think it's stress. I think um, that it's a stressful time for men and women, but particularly for women because they are identified.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah, they're identified sometimes in their reproductive health, and that we create in the media all of this. You have to be 20 the rest of your life, and the second you're not, you're tossed away kind of thing. And so stress also increases the blood pressure. So I frequently look at holy basil as having just as important of a role in all of that. And I believe there's oftentimes, we always think about estrogen declines because we stop menstruating. And that may be so, but I'm seeing more and more excess estrogen from everything from the overuse of birth control and our toxic environment,
Plastic sense.
the plastics and all of that. And so I'll oftentimes look at DIM, DIM, that's the broccoli sprout extract stuff that helps with the clearance of some of that. And really looking at the uniqueness of the individual in front of us to create some other herbs to deal with um, addressing balance and health, but recognizing that it isn't always about pushing the blood pressure down lower, that it's oftentimes the tension that comes with this normal, healthy transition in life. And that it's not, menopause isn't a disease. It is something that we need to recognize and support in that transition into another phase of our life, just like from adolescence to adulthood.
So I'd also like to add in, and I want to make sure that you guys know I'm a clinical practicing herbalist and a female, and approaching menopause. And so I would like to add something in about this. Bob likes to, in his class in gynecology and women's health, he likes to talk about how there shouldn't really be any PMS. If there's PMS, you're having hormone dysregulation. So in a general sense, if we understood the endocrine system properly, we would understand that it's the signaling for things like our blood pressure and our rhythmic movements and the way our rest of our body responds. So if you are getting an all of a sudden heightened blood pressure right when you're starting to go through your menopause or right after you felt like your symptoms were waning off, then there's an endocrine system disruption. One of the hormones is out of balance. It's not that you have to bring the blood pressure down, it's that you have to balance your hormones. There's something going on. And so Bob was right about that, but not concentrating on medicines to bring your blood pressure down, but concentrating on the irregular endocrine system in which one is heightened and which one's not. And I was reminded of that by one of our students asking me about if I'm still irritable after I'm taking a hormone formula. My question is whether that's the right formula for you. That means you're getting too much of a certain hormone balancer. We need to bring it back down, one of them back down. So really looking at it more as an endocrine system disruption and not as high blood pressure.
And I will add to that, especially as we age, when we see weight gain, when we see blood pressure, and just ignoring the postmenopausal thing for a moment, the one of the things we also, and I'm sorry, I'm working off the top of my head on all of this, to also look at magnesium.
Yes.
Magnesium helping with stress,
Signaling
helping,
of the heart.
signaling of nerve function when we look at the synaptic gap and the popping back and forth of all of
Absolutely, I agree.
our ions. That magnesium deficiency is one of the more common things in for our body to regulate and function better. I will put a caution, and I hate to say it, I have been so guilty of this. There's menopause formulas in Chinese medicine going back to, that's usually referred to as yin deficiency.
But everybody's not.
Yeah, and so we use the Luwei Di Huangwan or Zhibai Di Huangwan that adds 2 herbs to that formula. I've had women who haven't had a menses in 2 or 3 years start taking that formula because it's so moistening and nourishing to the yin that they start their menses up again in a really pissed at me that I make them go through menopause a second time. So we need to be cautious and recognize
Our body's
that we
supposed to
don't
be
need
doing
to treat menopause. We need to support menopause for a healthy transition into another part of life, and to nourish and support the body and recognize it's not a disease. If it is overwhelming, then there is a greater imbalance that needs to be adjusted. I hate to say it, my when I was going through acupuncture school and learning all this cool stuff, um, I won't say I mean, all of my menopause was very book learning. I think my mom was in her 70s at the time, something like that. And I literally was like, Mom, I don't remember you complaining about hot flashes and menopause or anything like that. And she'd had a partial hysterectomy. And she was like, yeah, they gave me some estrogen, the horse pea pills, and she's like, about once every 6 months, usually if I had a glass of wine, I'd get a hot flash and I'd take it and then I'd stop taking it. And I was like, oh, that's not the right way to take that.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
But the reality was, even though she'd had a hysterectomy, even though, and then she got a slight flare up, she had no menopause symptoms. And again, my mother was no more perfect than I am, but she was generally a healthy eater, an active person, and generally a positive, happy person through most of her life. And I believe it was because she, you know, ate a nice, well-rounded diet, was active, and found life was generally good. She didn't need to be treated, and so her menopause was a non-issue.
Okay, so in reference to this, Chaihu versus I can't say that
Shangfu.
for irritability, depression in formula.
There's an interesting question. So Chaihu is Bupleurum, Shangfu is, oh my God, I can't believe I can't think of the Latin name for it. It grows here.
You don't have to know everything.
Cypress root, cyperus root. Yeah,
Nice.
sorry, I'm a little slow this late at night. I need more coffee.
Yeah,
Um,
that's it.
so those two herbs are so distinctly different, and we think of them as interchangeably, and they're not. Um, when we look at
Same
Pleurum,
thing.
the Chai Hu, it has an upward energy, and so uh, it's important to recognize that although we use it to regulate the liver chi, and it's used more than that, it comes in the release exterior section and has that upward energy. We see it used in formulas specifically to guide upward, and so the Shang Fu has more of an abdominal function. And I won't say I happily use Chai Hu all of the time. And obviously, free and easy water, sure, yeah.
Yes.
Shayawan or Jahwe Shayawan, hand that out like candy canes. Um, I have seen some side effects from the Chai Hu where people who um, are anemic, blood deficient, the chai hu can be too stimulating. People who have too much energy in their head, if you will, so headaches, even though we use chai hu for temporal headaches, um, if we're pushing the energy in too much chai hu in a formula, it can literally cause the headaches. So the shang fu is nice and gentle. Uh, I've dug some up. It's so rooted in the ground, and almost like you have to dig 3 feet in the ground to dig that sucker up. It's like it's keeping the chi down, and so I tend to use my chai hu with caution, watching for an adverse reaction, and we'll go to Shang Fu. I'll increase Chen Pi, sure, any of our citrus peels, and use those for the regulatory action. And I'll even uh, the uh,
I'll help you if I know.
oh, I can't think of a name of it.
It's
Doesn't
okay.
matter.
Go with that.
The China berry. I can't think of the Latin name
Oh,
for it or
I
the
know
Chinese
China
name.
beer. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll give you the Latin if
that's
you want.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important that we too often go, gee, stagnation, stress, here's some chai hu. And I'm as guilty as the next guy of that. And so I oftentimes try to come up with non chai hu approaches to it. From the Western standpoint, I'm a huge fan of holy basil. So any of our aromatics, basil in particular, can have a nice regulatory, and all of our citrus peel. And the
The on.
yeah, yes. Sorry. Xuan Lian Zi is the China berry. That I'll sometimes use that for short periods of time because there is a toxicity to those. Um, but Western herbalists use orange peel and citrus peel all the time, and I think not enough.
Mm.
I think orange peel is underutilized and very powerful. Hey, we're in Florida, so we got crap tons of citrus peel.
Okay, so I want to keep you on track, and you're going to have a choice. I'm going to give you a
We got
time.
30 minutes left.
So you got 30 minutes ish because you can go over. Do you want to address that first question about children, or
Oh, sure.
wait, approaches to thyroid and Chinese and Western spotting, if you're going to spot some serious things like Alzheimer's or cancer, is there a heads up that we're looking for? So any of those three,
Mm.
like they're all very long. That's why I'm saying that. And so do you
Let's go
want
with kitties and
to go with that
puppies.
one? Okay,
So,
so let's first address that, Laura. This was a question that you had, if you're still on, about children
so
in general. So we're
yeah.
going to talk
So,
about it.
what are effective common herbs for congestion that can be given to children? Also, herbs for anxiety, nervousness, etc. Also for children, and how is dosage determined? So, there are in we sum this up kind of in special populations. And one of the things we always talk about, whether we're talking infants or children or dogs or cats or horses, those are special populations that require us to adjust both the way we administer our herbs, but also our dosing of our herbs, and oftentimes what herbs we're going to use. And, and my running joke is the smaller the organism, the faster the system, and the faster you can kill them. So when we're working with small organisms like babies and children, we want to use herbs that are generally recognized as safe. And it's funny, I could almost sign, you said anxiety, nervousness, congestion, chamomile, and we're done. Uh, I'm being a smartass.
You are, because I hate chamomile. It makes me angry.
I know.
And so catnip I would use.
But catnip, chamomile, nettles would all be very safe generally. And uh, anxiety and nervousness, catnip, oat straw, chamomile would be very effective for anxiety and nervousness. The nettles would probably be more effective for congestion issues. But I would also say, how come? And a single round of antibiotics as an infant or as a young child potentially has enough to screw up their immune system and their digestive
for a
system
long time.
to create that. And certainly for some kids, they've had multiple rounds of antibiotics. And sometimes necessarily, like antibiotics are horrible, but they also save people's lives. And something as simple as a difficult birth where a C-section was necessary may also be that passage through the vaginal canal is the initial inoculation of that baby's digestive system and immune system with the vaginal flora. And so with a C-section, unless you have a really progressive doctor that would have taken a vaginal swab and then put that in the baby's mouth and yes, inoculated that baby after the C-section, which I'm going to say most don't do, that kid already came in potentially compromised. And so there are specific infant probiotics, and if once you're past let's call it 4 or 5 years old, certainly super appropriate to start to give a children's or even an adult probiotic at adjusted dosages. But when we come to the dosing of the herbs, what are our two fancy names?
Therapeutic dosing, you mean like that?
No, what's the pharmacists use the
So we're gonna use oh my gosh, Lord, this is showing our age and the time. We're gonna use Calling's rule.
Calling's rule. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, or I'll go ahead and post them in the chat. Yeah.
So the reality is in Chinese medicine, we usually just do it by weight. to about 2 years old. So if we look at 120 to 150 is the average adult person, and we look at our standard adult dosing on that, then we can just start like, if you're looking at 60 pounds, then you're going to do half the dosage, and you can do that on back. Under 2 years old, I would say we have to be a little bit more precise. And I tend to use very minimal herbs. If they're still breastfeeding at that time, I'll sometimes either, if it's something the mom can drink and it processed through the breast milk, but you have to be very careful of changing the, like things like tianmendong, asparagus root, what's the Ayurvedic name for that?
Shatavari.
Shatavari can change the breast milk. Any of our very bitter herbs can actually dry up the breast milk sometimes. Um, but you can also do just a tea, add that into a bottle, or even drip it down the breast and mix it. It mixes with the breast milk as they're breastfeeding. And so we can literally look at just minuscule dosing. I tend to, with children, but especially when we look at that 6 month to about 4 years old, it's usually the food. Um, and so when we look at when we look at congestion issues or frequency of cold, some of the night terrors even can be food related. That too soon they're given too hard to digest foods. And specifically look for a rosiness, almost a mottled look on the cheeks themselves. So not here, not on the malar, but here in the soft parts of the cheek. If you got a 1 year old that you just started feeding yummy stuff off your plate, they're breastfeeding less, and all of a sudden they got really snotty, coughy, fussy, maybe starting to have nightmares. That it's probably you gave them too hard to digest foods too soon.
So I wrote it into the chat, but I want to say it out loud in case you're not monitoring your chat. It's going to be Clark's rule, Young's rule, and Calling's rule. My advice to you as a mom of a million children and still a mom as I move up in fosters and everything else is go with the one that's the easiest. Don't fixate too hard on those. Go with the one that you understand mathematically.
Yeah.
And under 2 years old, you have to be careful, like special populations, not to just go strictly on weight. It's metabolism as well.
And with any adults, children's, infants, and dogs and cats, therapeutic dosing, what is the therapeutic dose? And for little kids and infants in particular, I will start at a sub-therapeutic dose. And if we're choosing the right herb or herbs, a very small amount, what we would not consider an effective dosage, can usually work really well. For infants and very young children, I find gentle acupressure, probiotics, and adjusting the food has the most dramatic impact. And so that can be a huge, huge thing. And too often the little ones are exposed to way too much crap in our society. You send them to daycare, you send them to school. Here's the goldfish and the cookies. Get get a doctor to write a note that they'll have anaphylactic shock if they eat crap. They give out the red M&Ms to create the ADHD issues and so forth. So really struggle now with the food control, so you don't spend the next 20 years fighting them for it. It really, it is one of the greatest impacts is the food we feed those kids. After that, it's if we're able to fix the food, the herbs work magically unless they've gone through a crap ton of antibiotics.
So real quick for Laura, that was the question that was prompted by Laura, and she just said something online, so I know she's still there. Laura, if there's anything specific that you need to know, please say it now in the chat so that I can add in, like if there's a question. The other thing is because we have 20 minutes, I don't know that Bob can get to goo worms or goo syndrome, which is one of the questions. But what I do want you to know is if you wanted to know about goo syndrome, on our YouTube channel, we have probably an hour and a half of babbling in the car about goo syndrome because I had Bob trapped and I said, tell me about goose syndrome. And I started recording. You won't see our picture, but you'll hear the entire thing. So don't think you have the wrong thing. Turn your volume up.
Yeah.
And we have an hour and a half conversation about goose syndrome and what it could be. And so it's something that if you want to go there, if we don't get to it, that's a good place to start. Plus, we'll try to do it after this. We'll try to
Yeah.
address it in the next one.
Yeah, and if we haven't said it in a while, the YouTube channel Tradition School of Herbal Studies, you'll find
Lots of free stuff.
yeah, a lot of videos. We've got probably close to 100 videos, so do subscribe. We're poised in the next few days to record a bunch more that we're going to try to come up with. And we'll take some of these questions and ideas that you all have been asking because these are great questions, and we'll try to produce some videos over them because it's hard to sum up some of these off the top of my head, which is impressive, I think, but also to give it the depth because something like goo worms literally an
It's a
hour.
2 hour thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's still just touching the surface of it. And I hate to say it for the non-Chinese folks, the concept of goo worms is super challenging to discuss. And I think we went into it some
We
in
did.
the
I
video.
questioned you good
Yeah,
about it.
I
Yeah,
think
I
we
did well.
tried to come up with a little bit of that Western construct
Hmm.
of trying to understand that idea of goo syndrome or goo worms. For those of you who are Chinese medicine folks, I really like there's some really lengthy interviews with Heiner Fruhoff that I think is very instructive. Some of the basic tenets and I of course like my expansion on the idea into the Western herbal realm and my own use of it for things like Lyme disease.
So
and so forth.
definitely go there if you want to see about goose syndrome because it's such a long conversation. I want him, and if we talk about it tonight, then we do, but I don't think we'll have enough time.
Yeah,
So what is left on this list
yeah.
are several things that are expansive, including the goose syndrome. So herbal approaches to thyroid issues of
Oh, right.
any kind, which can be expansive.
Excess or
Yeah,
deficient or
right. So
Hashimoto's or
any thyroid, yeah, herbal approaches to that. To tofu, good for you or not? I have so much to say about that. It's such an argument.
all
And
right. Let me
yeah, thyroid approaches and
let me
goose syndrome, I think, is
let me
easier than the
talk.
tofu. Yeah,
Neither one's particularly easy.
yeah.
So thyroid is super challenging, and so when we look at thyroid, and this is there's more than just three categories that we look at. We look at hyperthyroid, we look at hypothyroid, and then we look at Hashimoto's, an autoimmune kind of thing. But there's various permutations of all of that elsewhere. And depending on who you ask, hypothyroid in particular is either the most overdiagnosed or underdiagnosed disorder there is. I would argue it's the underdiagnosed. So part of it is they too often the MDs, and I think it's important to recognize both symptoms, but also to recognize blood work is important. Um, it's funny. This is a vital part of your endocrine system. It is the only endocrine system issue that a general practitioner MD feels qualified for some ungodly reason to treat.
And they're not.
And they're not. Yeah, they don't do a good job at it generally. There's some times where it's just like, yep, here you go, it's a piece of cake. I think you should see an endocrinologist if you're taking a medical approach to it. And I think at the very least, an endocrinologist should do your initial testing, or not your, once you seem to be exhibiting the signs of hypothyroid or hyper, or that you should go see an endocrinologist to properly test. Or a functional medicine doc would probably be also a good choice. From an herbal standpoint, I see a couple of things. I see a lot of folks in the transition, either from uh, teen years into adulthood, i.e., they move out of the house and get a job and support themselves and be human, or the transition from college into adulthood. That is a very, very stressful time, and I find that commonly creates a borderline hypothyroidism where we see the primary symptom of fatigue and maybe weight gain, and it throws the TSH a little out of range, a little high. that is fairly easy to address and keep them off of Synthroid or Armor or any of the other different approaches to it. And that's primarily a stress response and can be fixed through adaptogens, adrenal type of herbs. From a Chinese perspective, I frequently will use a liver qi regulating. I hate to say it, Xia Yuan for an easy wander is oftentimes my approach to it, and it works like a champ, usually within a few months.
I have a question in reference to that kind of, so I thought it was
Hmm.
appropriate to break in because I know what I think about this as a practitioner. The answer to this, you and I might answer this differently, but
Hmm.
I have such a bad attitude about this. Is TSH the best indicator for thyroid health?
Oh, no, definitely not.
And that's why I said I have
Yeah,
such a bad attitude about this.
yeah.
Absolutely not, as far as I'm concerned.
I think TSH is
What they use, but not
it's so and so
always the
and
right thing.
TSH is part of the blood work. It is not a standard test, like they have to order it. It's thyroid stimulating hormone, so it's important to recognize that a high TSH is indicative of hypo, underacting thyroid. A low TSH is indicative of hyper. And I would argue that it's important if I suspect there's a thyroid issue on somebody, and we'll talk about some of those potential warning signs. Um, I I usually encourage TSH, T3, T4, and an antibody test. I don't usually start looking at reverse T3, T4. I'll leave that to the endocrinologists or the functional medicine docs. But screening for Hashimoto's, which seems to be very prevalent, and looking at both T3 and T4 and the ability for conversion of one to the other, I think is important and will oftentimes catch some of those low, that borderline hypothyroid in particular. Um, Things that I look for is one of my key indicators. It's kind of like I'm teaching that in a couple of weeks. The what we call the four pillars of diagnostics in Chinese medicine, and one of the first ones is observation. And so, looking at the person, what are they telling us, both in their face and so forth? So, a loss of the outer third of your
Do you want me
eyebrow.
to show?
Huh? Oh, yeah. Stick your face up there,
Yeah.
Renee. She is the poster child. And it's funny. Oh, you got to stick your face
See,
all. Get it on up in there. Don't be shy. Ah,
you
you
see,
darn
right? You
blondes
see
can't show.
right here, there's nothing there, and over here it goes to right there, and then there's nothing there.
Yeah. So we can see the loss of the outer third of the eyebrow, thinning hair, hair falling out, unexplainable weight gain, depression, anxiety can all, and there's a longer list than that. But I find I'll have people who are exercising, eating healthy, but that outer third of the eyebrow is missing, and they're depressed, and they've got an extra 10 pounds on. They don't understand why it's there, and their TSH shows that they're fine.
I want to say something about this.
Yeah, your TSH shows you're fine.
Right. So I want to say something about this. It's important to understand that I've had an expert endocrinologist that was the head of the department at Mayo Clinic tell me that they don't even understand the endocrine system and the thyroid properly. The other thing I want to point out is something that we see in practice is your normal. If your normal has been this elevation and you've had it tested over the years and it's always stated this, we want to see a reflection of that changing. So it being low, it being high may not be relevant for you to go right on to medication if in fact you've been low or high your entire life. We want to see a change in your normal, and it's something that's completely disregarded because you can move within the category of being normal, but if you are at the top of normal and you drop all the way to the bottom of normal, you are having a problem and it needs to be dealt with, and you get blown off and you get really bad care.
And there's a couple of other things to look at in the towards the tip of the tongue, what we would call right on the line between heart and lung in Ayurvedic tongue diagnosis. There's kind of, I always call it like a lazy L, where there's a little line in the tongue that looks like the bottom shelf of the L dropped off a little bit. To me, is also indicative of a thyroid issue within that Ayurvedic understanding of tongue diagnosis. Um, Also, low body temperature is indicative of that. So a feeling of cold is indicative. And I think it's funny, Chinese medicine uh, Mm, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
going to come back to that. Chinese medicine usually tries really hard to say, let your symptoms be your guide, do a good diagnosis, tongue pulse, and questioning, and what that pattern is, that's what we treat. And yet, every textbook I've read, or most of the textbooks that I've read, say hypothyroid is kidney yang deficiency. I have seen one case of kidney yang deficiency hypothyroid. And I promise I've seen hundreds of cases of hypothyroidism. And so I think that especially those transitional times when we see the thyroid all of a sudden go wonky has more to do with liver qi stagnation than kidney yang deficiency. We'll also see um, that there is a lack of nutrients. And so here's where it gets surprising. When we look at iodine, and I'm not a fan of supplementing with iodine. I tend to supplement with seaweed. Um, and so a lot of times, we don't see a lot of goiters anymore here in the US because we iodize our salt and that prevents it. But supplementing with iodine is sometimes correct. I try to supplement with seaweeds. Some people think they're yummy, the little seaweed snacks and things like that. Some people don't. But a lack of trace minerals, and there are many reasons, either a non-diverse diet or again, low stomach acid and malabsorption of minerals can lead to a lack of trace minerals that allows for the proper signaling and hormone functioning. Um,
I have something to say too.
and I'm going to say, I start with, and if we're looking at Western energetics, a tense condition, a deficient condition, it may be a cold and deficient, it may be hot and deficient. Um, or that tense idea, or even phlegm. So I always say, like, don't treat thyroid disorder. The idea of lemon balm does this, or it doesn't do that, or bugleweed this or that. Don't
Bring
do
back
that.
into balance.
Yeah, it is an imbalance that is expressed through temperature, weight, emotions. Treat that pattern of symptoms, whether you're a Western, a Chinese, or an Ayurvedic, and don't chase the numbers. If you have a malabsorption issue that is causing a hormone disruption, it's showing up more than just in a thyroid or a TSH or a T3, T4. Treat the pattern and support the organism, and I promise they'll get better.
So you just said something that I feel like I contradicted, but I didn't because I do well because good diagnosis and good blood work is
Yeah,
always needed. So one of the questions was from Lisa about I am so when she's talking about herself as a practitioner.
yeah.
So if I'm screening, I would usually order a THS. What would you order? And I answered it for her in my opinion as a practitioner, and I
Yeah,
said I will
T3,
ask you. So,
T4
so do
antibodies.
you order T3, T4, and antibodies? I
Mhm.
answered yes,
Yes.
but I also answered that we would need to do a T plus a free roaming T for the 4, and the T plus a free roaming for the 3, as well as a reverse and an
I
antibody.
don't usually do the
I know, but
reverse, though. It's not
I
wrong.
find that we all fall, like people who fall in the normal,
Yeah,
it doesn't
I,
show
I,
like if they're
I,
feeling like
I
they have a hypo or
I
hyper, they
usually,
usually are.
I know, but I usually don't. I'd rather treat the pattern.
I
I,
agree.
and
I
so
agree, but it's good
I,
to
I,
understand and
because
establish a pattern for them.
if I was going to recommend that they get either Synthroid or that they get Armor from somebody other than me, I don't prescribe those things. I'm not able to. Um, then that kind of information might be more important. But me as an herbalist, I don't really give a crap.
Okay, so let me because I didn't mean to, Lisa, I didn't mean to complicate our answers for you.
Yeah,
So Bob is saying T4, T3, and antibodies.
yeah.
I do want a free roaming, but it's only to establish a pattern. And I also believe, because we've both seen in the clinic, people who the doctors will discount their symptoms and say they're normal. And sometimes if we get a free roaming or reverse on that, we can establish a pattern of low or a pattern of high that I feel like I can give them armor to go argue with their doctor to get something other than herbal intervention. But I also agree with Bob. We have a great track record of dealing with hypo and hyperthyroid, as well as not agreeing with him that I've taken people, well, I've encourage them to get their doctors to take them off their medication because I feel like we can, versus if somebody's working well with their medication, Bob likes to leave them there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things.
Not wrong. Neither
Yeah,
approach is wrong.
I find it's it is a very
It's a
either
skill.
it's an easy
Yeah. Hmm.
patient or a very skilled doctor to get there's now natural thyroid, there's a T3 T4, this armor thyroid. I've watched a lot of functional medicine docs and non-functional medicine docs chasing the dosage of armor until the person is going insane. And
Yes,
so
I
armor
agree
is
with you.
great because it is replacing the T3 and the T4. It is a more natural product, but it's expensive. It is challenging for the doctor to get it right, and that also requires the challenge of the client to get it right in the way they take it. And Synthroid when Synthroid works, it actually works really well with minimal side effects. The problem is it doesn't always work. And so when I find somebody's been on Synthroid for 20 years and they haven't changed the dosage in 20 years once they got it right, and they're not getting any side effects, I literally say, why the hell do you want to stop?
I
It's
agree
doing
with
a
that.
good job. And so I'd rather say, let's support you through nutrition. Let's look at all of the system and see where the imbalances are. We can look at
That's good sound
nutritional
advice. I agree with that.
some of the nutritional deficiencies that might be caused by the synthroid. So we can look at minerals and B vitamins. Those are generally what's depleted ever so slightly from that. So I it's easy for my ego to get in the way to say I can do this with herbs when reality is sometimes the prescription medications do a really good job. And I think that sometimes when it's properly prescribed, properly researched, I've seen it be very effective where literally people have been on it for 40 and 50 years with no adverse side effects that I've noticed, that they've noticed, that the doctors have noticed, that they're living a long, healthy, normal life. And I've also watched people within 2 or 3 years go completely insane with somebody trying to do armor when that's not the right approach for them. So it is unique to the individual. I would say make sure we look at the person as a whole and not focus on a numerical value or a single part of the endocrine system, but all of the symptoms as a pattern. Even though we can certainly say, oh, HPA axis, and we can throw adaptogens, and we can do this, you start to be chasing after numbers, and so find what's unique to that individual. Was stress, was hereditary, was endocrine disruption. Uh, if you're doing Chinese energetic stuff, hot, cold, wet, dry, deficient, excess, yin, yang, qi, blood. Any of those patterns may exist within the Chinese paradigm.
Okay, so it's 7:59 and we were
Oh,
supposed to
crap.
be done at 8. So
Badass.
we're on a slight delay. So we're going to take this time to do like public service announcements and allow you to step in and ask questions as we sign off so
And,
that we don't discount
and
anyone.
I hate to say it, I'm going to do a selfless plug. If you're in the area, we do see clients and patients here for both herbs and acupuncture. We have an intern clinic here where our students, our senior students in both Chinese and Western, get practice. So they see clients here at a reduced rate. Biggest difference is price and experience. Um, and needless to say, we have an herb school here where we teach both Western and Chinese herbal medicine, set up a little bit differently. But because of COVID, it's now online. So even some of you who may not be here in the Tampa Bay area in Florida, you can still attend. And we try to do a really good job and we'll ship out herbs to you. Some of you are in Europe. I don't think I can ship the herbs to you, but a lot of the herbs we talk about specifically in the Western, I know you can source there. We do talk specifically about some of our subtropical and tropical herbs here, things like the Sita and the Bidens and the tropical chickweed, the Drimerias, the guinea hen weed. There's so many other unique plants here in the Florida and Caribbean that Renee and I both have experience in. So for some of you, they would be really unique if you're not in this immediate subtropical tropical area. Also, for those of you who are in the area or really want to travel this New Year's Day, we're doing a free herb walk down on the south side of St. Pete, one of the park at Forest Bluff Park at 10 a.m. You're welcome to join us. We'll try to record it. We'll either do it on Facebook Live or we'll do it on YouTube, one of the two. Don't forget to check out our YouTube page. Watch a crap ton of videos. Please follow us and watch a lot. We're trying to monetize it.
If you push subscribe on there, you'll know that the new herb walk's been put on, and it doesn't mean you pay for anything. It just means you get notices when we put new things up.
And
It
we try to at least once a month do a free class, usually on a Friday evening. I'm really enjoying this format. I think these questions you guys hit us with are phenomenal. I can't wait to read all the comments that I'm not seeing for whatever reason. I don't know why I'm not seeing them. So we're going to try to continue to do this on a fairly regular basis. I'm sure there's some questions or comments that we didn't get around to.
There are, and I got them. I
So
have them written down, you guys.
January 8th, I believe we're doing this again. So make sure that you mark that you're going or interested, so that when we pop up with the video, that you get a notice. And of course, we're going to save this and we'll post this. So we'll have this. We'll probably, if I'm able to figure out how to do it, we'll post it on YouTube as well, so that you can go back and listen to some of the comments and decide whether or not we're completely insane.
So anything that you need to ask us, let me know. I wrote down every single comment so that if we didn't get to your question, we will. Remember GU syndrome, we have a video out about that, but I'm happy to go over it. We do enjoy this. We think it's
Yeah,
successful.
super fun.
And so just tune in again and get your questions ready and send them ahead of time if you need discussion for sure.
And I encourage all of you to find an herbalist in your area if there's nobody around. I do Skype consults. It does take a couple of weeks sometimes to get in to see me as a new client. And so certainly some things are better addressed through herbs, Western or Chinese, and other things through acupuncture. I have not figured out how to do acupuncture through the joy of Skype. If you're frustrated, if you're not able to find somebody locally to work with you, and I would say that is always your first choice. If you're not sure how to find an herbalist in your community, I really recommend going to the American Herbalist Guild. That is our professional organization for herbalists, and you can find both Western and Chinese herbalists there. Somewhere on there they've got on their website find an herbalist, and those are folks who are usually very experienced herbalists there on that page. So check us out on traditionsherbschool.com. Check us out on YouTube, Tradition School of Herbal Studies, or Acupuncture and Herbal Therapies at acuherbals.com. Thank you, everybody from all over the freaking world, across the pond, and I don't even know where else. And I can't wait to see all the comments and quiz Renee about this. And I hope we see you either on an herb walk or that we see you in about a week or so.
Real quick, anybody on that's here Wednesday night, burning bowl to give away and making our herbal baths and herbal smudges for New Year's night to use to bring in what you want for the new year. That's going to be a class that's Wednesday night.
Yeah, this coming Wednesday.
At the other classroom. We're going to do a fire and everything.
So sorry about the short notice, but enough people harassed Renee and said, oh my God, we got to bring the new year in right. So we didn't think it was appropriate to do it on New Year's Eve. Too many other conflicts. So we're going to do it the night before and really prepare folks. So we do have the Facebook event. We're a little clunky and low tech, so you'll either have to call in or pay the day of. But do please let us know if you plan to come, so that we can make appropriate accommodations. And if we get enough folks, the weather should be beautiful. We'll do it outside. We'll pop up the tents. We'll have the fire outside so that we can be COVID safe for everybody. So thank you all so much for hanging out. For those of you where it's the middle of the night, y'all are amazing. And I look forward to doing this again soon. So good night, all.
Bye, you guys. Thank you. You did a great job. I'm off.